Hello, welcome to lesson and assignment 21. It's two sets of slides that I'm going to be talking about and getting you to take some notes. The first one is going to be the timeline of life set that looks like this, and the second one is the notes called fertilization to baby. What I want you to know is that both sets of slides cover kind of the same thing. Why did I do two slides on the same thing? Because I think it's good to look at things in different ways. One set of diagrams might use certain words and terms, and another might look at it a little bit differently. So this lesson and assignment is just you watching me go through these slides, give you some notes. I'll tell you to take some things down on here for two whole sets of slides. It's going to be a little bit longer of a video, but all your assignment is to take the notes that I write on the paper down and submit those pictures to me in the Google Classroom. So let's begin. This might take a little bit of time, but we'll try and get through it as quickly as we can while explaining everything that's important. So the timeline of life slides look like this. The first thing to know, one egg is released from the ovaries. We know that. We've already studied the female reproductive system. Remember, there's these follicles in the ovary, and then that egg is going to go down the fallopian tube. At the same time that this egg is traveling down the fallopian tube in this window where it wants to get fertilized, sperm cells are ejaculated from the penis during sex. Sperm cells swim up the vagina and meet the egg cell. So a lot to go through there, but basically, let's see if I have a meter stick here. Yes, I do. Ooh, that was loud. So the sperm travels up the fallopian tube while the egg is traveling down the fallopian tube, and they meet here. So if they meet, let's go to the next slide. The sperm and the egg fuse. Fertilization has occurred. So now you've had this right here, you can write down. A sex cell equals 1/2, and this is a sex cell, and that's a half cell, right? It's got half of the genetic information. It's gone through meiosis. When they combine equal one whole cell equal new life. So when the sperm and the egg meet, it's half from the mom, half from the dad. Boom! Now they've got a full set of genes. And we're going to be talking a lot about genetics coming up very soon. So that's exciting. So if you didn't understand genes and chromosomes and DNA when we were talking about the nucleus of a cell and meiosis, you're going to get another look at that. And it'll be a little bit different and maybe a little bit more clear as we get on. So once they combined, you have something called what? What's that called? When the sperm meets the egg. A zygote. Cool. So the cells divide. Now what happens here, don't worry about the two cells divide to 4, but know that as soon as the sperm meets the egg, those cells, now they're going to go through mitosis. They're going to grow a baby. No more meiosis. They're not making sperm and egg anymore. They're making a baby, so it's going to go through mitosis. So this cell's going to grow into 2, and then 4, and then 8, and it's going to try and create a ball. That's the first thing that it tries to do, and there's a special name for that. So let's move down, and you can actually see right there. The group of cells keep dividing until they form a ball, and a ball of cells is called an embryo. There's your first important term that you need to know. Once that sperm and egg have divided enough times to make a ball, we now call that an embryo. Now, this is where you could either have the baby or not, because if this embryo doesn't attach to the uterus walls, the woman has her menstrual cycle and there's no child. But right here you could see if the embryo implants into the lining of the uterus, fertilization is complete and it can grow. The embryo is now attached to the uterus wall by a placenta. At 6 weeks, the embryo is called a fetus, and the fetus will get its nutrients from the umbilical cord. So that umbilical cord grows. Let's take a look at that for a second. So some things to know here. The embryo attaches, cool. The embryo is now attached to the wall by a placenta. Circle that word. And a fetus equals 6 weeks. The fetus will get its nutrients via the umbilical cord, and you should know what that is. An umbilical cord is a cord that attaches from the baby to the mother, where your belly button is, and that's going to be all of your nutrients and blood and everything that keeps that baby alive while it's inside the mother. So far, so good. Let's move on. The fetus continues to grow in the womb. Now, one of our assignments coming up is going to be a textbook assignment. It's one of the next assignments. And that whole section here, I'm just going to write down here that there's a lot coming in the textbook assignment that we have coming up next that's going to actually talk about every stage from that little ball until it is born. All of the stages, the trimesters and things like that, which you've probably heard of. We'll be going into detail into that soon. Now, after 9 months or 40 weeks, the mother goes into labor. It's called, Labor Day or your birthday if you're the child, right? Great illustration. The water breaks, the cervix dilates, and the mother's uterus contracts to push out the baby. So the uterus that was holding the baby, the sac that was protecting the baby breaks. That sac is filled with water. So when a woman says her water breaks, right, that actually means that kind of protective sac that was keeping the baby safe, keeping it shielded, breaks. The baby's ready to be born. The uterus contracts and squeezes, and it pushes the baby out. The mother will try to breastfeed the baby to ensure it gets essential nutrients and antibodies. At 12 months, the baby becomes a toddler. Now, I'm going through this fast because, like I said, we have another slideshow that talks about it in some more details, and then we have a textbook assignment that also talks about it. So if everything that you know about childbirth and development isn't in this slide, don't worry. There's going to be a couple more versions of the same thing with some different details along the way. So I'm going through this very fast. This is important here. 12 months. 12 months equals toddler. There we go. At 3 years old, a toddler becomes a child. That's another key term. So you could say 3 years, child. That's important to know. These are just kind of milestones that we have terminology for. Let's move on. All right. Now we get to talking about puberty. So this would be like that egg has been fertilized, it's grown up, it's become a person. It's ready to procreate and make its own life eventually. So between the ages of 10 and 15, the child reaches puberty. The chemicals that control puberty are called the sex hormones. So this would be male, and that would be female. You can even cross that O off. We kind of just call it estrogen now. So in males, it's mostly testosterone, and in females, it's mostly estrogen. And remember, puberty kind of happens between the ages of 10 to 15. Males start puberty at about 11 years old. They don't necessarily show symptoms or signs of puberty. Females normally show the signs first, but actually it's happening in men pretty young. So males start around 11, and in males, these are some of the signatures of puberty. The voice deepening, shoulders getting wider, stronger, and the testes and penis get larger and begin to produce sperm. So those are some of the things that happen when a male hits puberty. Those are the signs. Now we move on, and obviously we're going to be talking about what happens in a female and male here. Changes that occur in males and females are pubic hair under the arm and hair on the body. Now in females, puberty starts at about 13, and breasts develop in females. These are signs that show that someone's going through puberty as a woman. Breasts develop, ovaries start to release eggs, and the period starts. And the hips actually get a little bit wider in a female. Well, obviously that's to have children, right? A female has a period every 28 days-ish. And you can see here, there's kind of this timeline called the fertile days. That's kind of that window. That is when the egg is traveling through the fallopian tube sometime in those days. not all of them, but about 48 hours in this kind of window is when a woman is most likely to get pregnant. So what you could say here, I would put down when egg is in fallopian tube. Because that's kind of prime time. That's when if the sperm meets the egg in that fallopian tube, it'll start growing, it'll come down, and it'll attach to the uterus. And then you would have a child. And here we go. This is talking about menstruation. During the monthly cycle, the lining of the uterus builds up. We talked about that, right? The uterus is building up nutrients and blood supply for that egg before the umbilical cord grows. So every month, the lining of the uterus is building up, becoming enriched. And during the monthly cycle, the egg is released on about the 14th day. At the end of the monthly cycle, if the egg is not fertilized, the lining of the uterus breaks away, and this is called menstruation. The lining of the uterus sheds, gets rid of all that blood and nutrients to keep a baby alive or keep the egg alive, and it's shed, and that's when a woman gets her period. So that's one way of kind of looking at from when an egg is fertilized to when the child is born, child reaches puberty, so that it could actually create a new life through sex and have another baby. So that's kind of like the whole life cycle of a human, kind of explained very quickly, but we've talked about some stuff before. Now that brings us to the next set here. Let's see. The fertilization to baby slides. So we'll take a look at that now. So this is kind of what we're looking at. Now remember, some of the stuff here is going to be stuff that we just talked about, but maybe with some different words or different terminology and focusing on different parts of the life cycle. So that's why I'm giving you two separate sets of slides, because one explains some things well and the other explains more well. So this is the second part, the fertilization baby slides, which are the next pages in your packet. And of course, as I'm taking notes, you're taking notes, and that's what your assignment is for lesson 21 and assignment 21, is to submit these notes to me. So give me 1 second, and we will start these. All right, I just had to take a little break there for a sec, so we're moving on to the second set of slides, the fertilization to baby slides. I didn't put these in the Google Classroom because they're in PowerPoint, not in Google Slides, and it's just a little sloppy. But you have great handouts in the package, and you also have it here and online to look at in your PDF of the entire package. So fertilization to baby, well, some of this is review, so let's go through it and let's emphasize the important stuff and take notes. Got my pencil. As needed. Fertilization in mammals occurs in the fallopian tube. I would underline that just to emphasize that again. In the fallopian tube. It doesn't occur in the uterus. Lots of people think that, but fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube. The ova is viable for approximately 24 hours after being ovulated. So once that egg, ova, another word, remember how I said to use different words, but once that egg comes out, it's 24 hours, I would say 24 to 48 hours. Actually, that egg is prime time to be fertilized. And if it is in the fallopian tube and it gets fertilized, then it will go in and attach to the uterus, hopefully. All right. Now, this is the most dense slide here. Okay, and it's a little bit hard to read on there. But basically, what you have here is the sperm approaches the egg, step one. The sperm enzymes digest the coating. That's pretty cool. So I would say step one, sperm near the egg. Step two, sperm enzymes. Enzymes are like chemicals that can break things down. Sperm enzymes eat, put that in brackets, the egg coating. Okay, that's kind of cool. And then next, this is fascinating. So this is kind of like step by step what happens. Sperm comes near, the enzymes eat the coating. Now the sperm is close to the center of the egg, and that's where the protein right here, it says protein on the sperm head bind to the receptor. So these little receptor molecules, and this protein in the head will stick. So protein in sperm head bind to receptors in the egg. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about actually how the sperm gets into the egg. It attaches, it digests it, it sticks, the protein sticks. Next, the plasma membrane of the sperm and the egg open, right? Number 4, sperm and egg, I guess you would call that membrane, become one. So the sperm membrane and the egg membrane kind of fuse into one thing, which leaves the nucleus of the sperm to meet up with the nucleus of the egg, which you see in the next one. The sperm nucleus and the egg nucleus combine, right? Put that there, sperm and egg nucleus combine. If you need to pause that for a second, do that. Go back and look at what I said there. But basically, the sperm approaches the egg. The sperm digests the outer layer of the egg. Then they stick together because the proteins bind to the receptor. Now they're locked. At that point, they open up. Their membranes become one. And then the nucleus could float in and meet the egg nucleus. And boom, we've created a zygote. Now that it's fertilized, if everything goes well, that egg that is fertilized, it implants into the uterus. We've talked about that. And an embryo is from when it is conceived to 8 weeks. That's an important term. Now, what do we have it after? What do we call it after that? Well, let's take a look. So how does this embryo develop? There's a little picture of an embryo developing. So we're going to talk about the stages of that now. All right, let's move on down here. An embryo is a multicellular organism in the early stages of development. There's a 2 and a 4 cell stage, an 8 stage, and then a placenta is an organ that forms from the embryo and the uterus. A placenta is kind of like a protective sac. It's the protective lining. So you want to know what that is. That's a key term. Moving on. Oh, perfect. There's more information on the placenta. Placenta contains blood vessels from the mother and the developing baby. And placenta is where the oxygen and nutrients diffuse from the mother's blood vessels into the baby's blood vessels. Waste diffuse from the baby's blood vessels into the mother's blood vessels. So the baby gives the waste to the mother, and the mother's body gets rid of all the waste that the baby's using. It's pretty amazing how the mother does all of the heavy work for that baby as it's growing inside. It's amazing. So now you know what a placenta is, right? It contains the blood vessels from the mother, and that's where all the oxygen and nutrients first go from until, you got your umbilical cord. There it is. Oh, what do you know? So then you have the umbilical cord. 2 arteries and a vein. Now, arteries take things away. Veins bring things in. Artery equal away from the baby. Veins equal into the baby. My writing's terrible today. It's science. You're supposed to write terrible. You ever read a doctor's prescription? It makes no sense. 2 arteries and a vein connect the fetus to the placenta. You also have the amniotic sac, which contains fluid that protects the fetus by giving it a stable environment. Think about it this way. If you put an egg in a jar, in a glass beaker, and you shook it, which I'm not going to do because I don't want to waste it, but it would crack. But if you put an egg in a jar and filled that jar with water, you could shake it, and the egg would just kind of float in the water and be protected. It wouldn't break as easily. That's what an amniotic sac is. It's a fluid-containing sac that wraps around a baby and gives it a stable environment. Shock absorbing. That's what the sac does there, right? Let's move on. What are some of the later stages of fetal development? By the end of the 8th week of pregnancy, an embryo is called a fetus, and the major structures are present. You can start to see head, arms, legs, bodies, brains are starting to develop, all kinds of things like this. So this is what we're going to kind of study in the next assignment coming up as well, is week 1, what develops, week 2, what develops, week 3, 4, 8, 10, 12, etc., etc. That's kind of what you need to know. You need to know the main things that happen at each stage. So by the end of the 8th week of pregnancy, the embryo is called a fetus. You should know that already. 8 equals a fetus. And then you can see it growing. Here we go. Human gestation, that just means like how long does a mother carry a baby? About 38 to 40 weeks is the gestation period in humans. Different species of things carry babies for different times. I think elephants carry babies for like a year or 2. Humans, about 40 weeks or 9 months. And this is kind of a cool little chart. You can see it a lot better in your actual handout, but you could see all the weeks right here and kind of what is started at each stage. Now, don't worry, you're going to have better charts coming up right away, so you don't need to memorize anything off here. I just want you to understand that at different stages, different parts of the fetus are developing and growing. So it's not like you just grow a human and you become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. No, you don't have a heart at some point. You don't have a brain at some point. You don't have different stages of this period as you're growing, or as the baby is growing inside the mother, the fetus. Different things are developing. So if there's somebody that has some kind of problems at childbirth, you can kind of tell what might have went wrong at what stage. You know, if you have brain problems, it's probably when the brain was being formed in that period. If you have different kinds of developmental disorders, you can kind of tell maybe at what stage as this fetus was growing inside the mother, something might have went a little bit wrong. Interesting to know. How do twins form? Well, there's 2 ways, right? So this is kind of cool. This is a question everybody wants to ask. There's identical twins and there's fraternal twins. So let's take a look. How do you make twins? Well, if you have identical twins, what happens is one egg is fertilized by sperm. Sperm meets egg, boom. But when it divides the first time, instead of just dividing into a blob and growing bigger and bigger, the first division becomes 2 separate things, and then they both grow. Fascinating. They're identical because they came from the same cell, it split up, and then they both grew to babies. Kind of cool. So let's look at this again. Identical twins. One egg is fertilized by one sperm. The embryo splits into 2 during the early stages, have identical genes, and must be of the same sex. 3 out of every 1,000 births. So that means that the eggs split, they have to be identical. They can't be one boy and one girl. That means they're not identical. That leads us to the next thing, non-identical twins here, which is the last slide of today. Fraternal twins. 2 eggs are ovulated and each is fertilized by a sperm cell. So instead of one egg being released, the woman accidentally or just releases 2 eggs, and both of them get fertilized by 2 sperm. Now, they're pretty darn similar, right? Because it's an egg, same time, sperm from the same man. They're going to be very similar, but they're not identical twins. They are no more genetically similar than any other sibling of the family. They're the same, right? It's just a matter of 2 eggs were released as opposed to 1. So if you have 2 twins that are not identical, and then they have a brother or a sister, genetically, they're all the exact same. One of them isn't a copy, right? So it's kind of neat to know. Now, this can happen. How do twins normally happen? Well, some people are genetically just disposed to having twins. But sometimes if people are trying to have a child and they're having trouble conceiving and they're taking extra drugs or hormones, especially the female, they might release more eggs, or that egg might be more likely to split and grow into separate things. So there's different ways that you can increase the chances of having twins, actually. Interesting to know. So your assignment today for lesson 21 and assignment 21 is to simply take the few notes that I gave you and submit those pages to me. If you want to put them all into one somehow or summarize it, and send me a picture of all the notes that we took. That's great. There's not a lot. This is just really a longer video that you need to watch and kind of get an overview. Your next assignment, assignment 22, is going to be using the textbook. Now, you don't have a textbook, but I'm going to make a PDF and take some pictures of the textbook for you so you could look at it there and do the sheets for the next section. So it's going to be kind of a summary of all of this stuff that we talked about, from when an egg is fertilized to when it grows. You're going to have some questions based out of the textbook, and you can also use these slides to help you, and you'll fill it out. So send your pictures of these slides, and we'll move on to lesson and assignment 22. Take care.